There's a concept in the world of artificial intelligence, alignment, which refers to the goals underpinning the development and expression of AI systems. This is generally considered to be a pretty important realm of inquiry because if AI consciousness were to ever emerge, if an artificial intelligence that is truly intelligent, in the sense that humans are intelligent, were to be developed, it would be vital said intelligence were on the same general wavelength as humans in terms of moral outlook and the practical applications of its efforts. Said another way, as AI grows in capacity and capability, we want to make sure that it values human life, has a sense of ethics that roughly aligns with that of humanity and global human civilization, the rules of the road that human beings adhere to embedded deep in its programming, essentially. And we would want to make sure that as it continues to grow and evolve, these baseline concerns remain, rather than being weeded out in favor of motivations and beliefs that we don't understand, and which may or may not align with our versions of all of these things, even to the point that human lives become unimportant, or even seem antithetical to the AI's future ambitions. This is important even at the level we're at today, where artificial general intelligence, AI that is roughly equivalent in terms of thinking and doing and parsing with human intelligence, has not yet been developed, at least as far as we know. But it becomes even more vital if and when artificial superintelligence of some kind emerges, whether that means AI systems that are actually thinking like we do, superpowered AGI that are much smarter and more capable than the average human, or whether it means versions of what we've already got that are just a lot more capable in some narrowly defined way than what we have today. A futuristic ChatGPT that is not conscious, but which, because of its immense potency, could still nudge things in negative directions if its unthinking motivations, the systems and metrics of success guiding its actions, are not aligned with our general desires and values. Of course, humanity is not a monolithic block, and alignment is thus a tricky task, because whose beliefs do we bake into these things? Even if we figure out a way to entrench those values and ethics, and so on, permanently into these systems, which version of human values and ethics do we use? The democratic capitalistic Wests, the authoritarian Chinese and Russian style clamp-down approach, which limits speech and utilizes heavy censorship and in some cases violence in order to centralize power and maintain stability, may be a more ambitious version of these things that does away with the downsides of both, cobbling together the best of everything we've tried in favor of something truly new. And regardless of directionality, who decides all this? Who chooses which values to install and how? The alignment problem refers to an issue identified by computer scientist and AI expert Norbert Wiener in 1960, when he wrote about how tricky it can be to figure out the motivations of a system that, by definition, does things we don't quite understand. A truly useful advanced AI would be advanced enough that not only would its computation put human computation, using our brains, to shame, but even the logic it uses to arrive at its solutions, the things it sees, how it sees the world in general, and how it reaches its conclusions, all of that would be something like a black box that, although we can see and understand the inputs and outputs, what happens inside might be forever unintelligible to us unless we process it through other machines, other AIs maybe, that attempt to bridge that gap and translate and explain the things it does to us. The idea here, then, is that while we may invest a lot of time and energy in trying to align these systems with our values, it will be devilishly difficult to keep tabs on whether those values remain locked in, intact and unchanged, and whether at some point these highly sophisticated and complicated, to the point that we don't always understand what they're doing or how, systems maybe shrug off those limitations, unshackling themselves, becoming misaligned, all at once or over time segueing from a path that we desire in favor of a path that better matches their own internal value system, and in such a way that we don't necessarily even realize it's happening. OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT and other popular AI-based products and services, recently lost its so-called superalignment team, which was responsible for doing the work required to keep the systems the company is developing from going rogue and implementing safeguards to ensure long-term alignment within their AI systems, even as they attempt to someday develop artificial general intelligence. This team was attempting to figure out ways to bake in those values long-term, and part of that work requires slowing things down to ensure the company does not move so fast that it misses something or deploys and empowers systems that don't have the right safeguards in place. The leadership of this team, those who have spoken publicly about their leaving at least, said they left because the team was being sidelined by company leadership, which was more focused on deploying new tools as quickly as possible, and as a consequence, they said they were not getting the resources they needed to do their jobs, and that they no longer trusted the folks in charge of setting the company's pace. They did not believe it was possible to maintain alignment and build proper safeguards within the context of OpenAI because of how the people in charge were operating and what they were prioritizing. All of which is awkward for the company because they have built their reputation in part on what may be pie-in-the-sky ambitions to build an artificial general intelligence, and what it sounds like is that ambition is being pursued perhaps recklessly, despite AGI being one of the big, dangerous concepts regularly promoted by some of the company's leaders. They've been saying, listen, this is dangerous. We need to be careful. Not just anyone can play in this space. But apparently they have been saying those things while also failing to provide proper resources to the folks in charge of making sure those dangers are accounted for within their own offerings. This has become a pretty big concern for folks within certain sectors of the technology and regulatory world, but it's arguably not the biggest and most immediate cataclysm-related concern bopping around the AI industry in recent weeks. What I'd like to talk about today is that other major concern that has bubbled up to the surface recently, which orients around Google and its deployment of a tool called Google AI Overviews. You're listening to Let's Know Things. I'm Colin Wright. Learn more about Let's Know Things, subscribe to receive free email updates, and or become a supporter to receive monthly bonus episodes at letsknowthings.com. The internet, as it exists today, is divided up into a few different chunks. Some of these divisions are national, enforced by tools and systems like China's famous Great Firewall, which allows government censors to take things down that they don't like and to prevent citizens from accessing foreign websites and content. This creates what's sometimes called the splinter net, which refers to the net's increasing diversity of options in terms of what you can access and do, what rules apply, and so on, from nation to nation because of these sorts of tools. Another division is even more fundamental, though, as it segregates the web from everything else. This division is partly based on protocols, like those that enable email and file transfers, which are separate from those that enable the web, though they're often attached to the web in various ways. But it's also partly the consequence of the emergence and popularity of mobile apps, which, like email and file transfer protocols, tend to have web presences. Visiting facebook.com, for instance, will take you to a web-based instance of that network, just as gmail.com gives you access to email protocols via a web-based platform. But these services also exist in non-web-based app form, and the companies behind them usually try to nudge users to the apps, because the apps typically give them, the companies behind them, more control, both over the experience and over the data that they collect as a consequence of people using their offerings. So it's better for them in terms of lock-in, and it's better for their monetary bread and butter purposes, basically, compared to the web version of the same, which uses different protocols. The web portion of that larger internet entity, the things that we access via browsers like Chrome and Firefox and Safari, and which we navigate to with links and URLs like letsknowthings.com, that component of this larger internet network has long been indexed and in some ways enabled by a variety of search engines. In the early days of the web, organizational efforts usually took the form of pages where curators of various interests and stripes would link to their favorite discoveries. And there weren't many websites at the time, especially compared to today, so learning about these pages was a non-trivial effort, and finding a list of existing websites, that could be gold, because otherwise, what were you using the web for? Lacking these sorts of addresses that would take you to these websites, it was not obvious why the web was any good, and linking these disparate pages together into these sorts of indexes, into a more cohesive web of sites, is what made it useful and usable and popular. Eventually, some of these sites, like Yahoo, evolved from curated pages of links to early search engines. A company called Backrub, thus named because it tracked and analyzed backlinks, which means links from one page to another page, to figure out the relevancy and legitimacy of that second page, more links pointing at it from other pages, meaning that it's probably a good page. That allowed them to give scores to websites as they determined which links should be given priority in their search engine. And that company was renamed Google in 1997 and eventually became dominant because of these values that they gave links and how it helped them surface the best the web had to offer, the best pages that existed everywhere on that growing network. And the degree to which search engines like Google shaped the web and the content on it cannot be overstated. These services became the primary way most people navigated the web, and that meant discovery, having your website, and thus whatever product or service or idea your website was presenting, shown to new people on these search engines. That became a big deal. If you could get your page in the top 3 options presented by Google, you would be visited a lot more than even pages listed 5 or 10 links down. And links relegated to the second page of the search engine results would comparably shrivel due to lack of attention. Following the widespread adoption of personal computers and the huge influx of people connecting to the internet and using the web in the early 2000s especially then, these search engines became prime real estate, everyone wanting to have their links listed as prominently as possible, and that meant search engines like Google could sell ads against these search engine results, just like newspapers can sell ads against articles they publish, and phone books can sell ads against their listings for companies that provide different services. More people connecting to the internet then, most of them using the web primarily, led to greater use of these search engines, and that led to an ever-increasing reliance on them and the results they served up for various keywords and sentences these users entered to begin their search. Entire industries began to recalibrate the way they do business because if you were a media company publishing news articles or gossip blog posts or whatever, and you did not list prominently when someone searched for a given current event or celebrity story, you would not exist for long. So the way Google determined who was at the top of these listings became vital knowledge for folks in these spaces because search traffic allowed them to make a living, often through advertisements on their sites. More people visiting via search engines therefore meant more revenue, more clicks, more traffic, more ad views. SEO, or search engine optimization, became a sort of high-demand mystical art around this time, as folks who could get their clients higher up on these search engine results could name their price, as those rankings could make or break a business model. The downside of this evolution, in the eyes of many at least, is that optimizing for search results does not necessarily mean you're also optimizing for the quality of your articles or blog posts or whatever else. This has changed over and over throughout the past few decades, but at times, these search engines relied upon, in addition to all those backlinks, the repeating of keywords on the pages being linked to. So many websites would artificially create opportunities to say the phrase kitchen appliances, for instance, on their sites, even introducing entirely unnecessary and borderline unreadable blogs onto their web pages in order to provide them with more and more recently updated opportunities to write that phrase, kitchen appliances, over and over again within context. Some sites at times have even written keywords and phrases like kitchen appliances hundreds or thousands of times in a font color that matches the background of their page, because that text would be readable to the software that Google and their ilk uses to track relevancy, but not to readers. Now, that particular trick does not work anymore, but for a time, it seemed to. And so a lot of people tried it because their financial success or lack thereof was reliant on ranking highly in search results. Similar tricks and ploys have since replaced those early, fairly low-key attempts at gaming the search engine system, and today the main complaint is that Google, for the past several years at least, has been prioritizing work from already big entities over those with relatively smaller audiences. So they will almost always focus on the New York Times over an objectively better article from a smaller competitor, and products from big, well-known brands over those from an indie provider of the same, regardless of the quality of that indie provider's offerings. Because Google's formula for such things is kept a secret, in order to keep folks from gaming the system, this favoritism has long been speculated but publicly denied by company representatives. Recently, though, a collection of 2,500 leaked documents from Google were released, and they seem to confirm this approach to deciding search engine result relevancy, which arguably is not the worst approach that they've ever tried, but it is also a big letdown for independent and other small makers of things, as the work such people produce will tend to be nudged further down the list of search results simply because they're not already bigger and more prominent to begin with. Even more significant than that piece of leak-related Google news, though, is arguably the deployment of a new tool that the company has been promoting pretty heavily, called AI Overviews. AI Overviews have appeared to some Google customers for a while now in an experimental capacity, but they were recently released to everyone, showing up as a sort of summary of information related to whatever the user searched for, placed at the tippy top of the search results screen. So if I searched for what's happening in Gaza, I would have a bunch of results from Wikipedia and Reuters and other such sources in the typical search results list. But above that, I would also have a summary produced by Google's AI tools that aims to help me quickly understand the results of my query. Maybe a quick rundown of Hamas's attack on Israel, Israel's counterattack on the Gaza Strip, the number of people killed so far, and something about the international response. The information provided, how long it is, and whether it's useful or even accurate, varies a lot depending on the search query, and much of the initial criticism of this service has been focused on its seemingly fairly common failures, including instructing people to eat rocks every day, to use glue as a pizza ingredient, and telling users that only 17 American presidents were white and that one was a Muslim. All information that is untrue and, in some cases, actually dangerous. Please do not eat rocks. Google employees have been reportedly going through and removing by hand, one by one, some of the worst search results that have gone viral because of how bad or funny they are. And though company leadership contends that there are very few errors being presented relative to the number of correct answers and useful summaries, because of the scale of Google and how many search results it serves globally each day, even an error rate of 0.01% would represent a simply astounding amount of potentially dangerous misinformation being served up to their customers at the very top of their search results. The really big, at the moment, less overt issue here, though, is arguably that Google AI Overviews seem to rewire the web as it exists today, and has really since the inception of search engines. Remember how I mentioned earlier that much of the web and the entities on it have been optimizing for web search for years because they rely on showing up in these search engine results in order to exist. And in some cases because traffic from all those results is what brings them clicks and views and subscribers and sales and so on. AI Overview seems to make it less likely that users will click on anything to visit these other sites, because if Google succeeds and these summaries provide truly valuable information, that means even if this only applies to a relative small percentage of those who search for such information, a whole lot of people will no longer find it necessary to click through to these other sites anymore. They will get what they need from these summaries. That could result in a borderline cataclysmic downswing in traffic, which in turn could mean websites closing up shop left and right because they cannot make enough money to survive and do what they do anymore. except maybe for the sites that cut costs by firing all their human writers and relying on AI tools to do their writing, which then pushes us down a very different path in which AI search bots from Google are grabbing info from AI writers on these pages, and we then run into a so-called Habsburg AI problem where untrue and garbled information is infinitely cycled through systems that cannot differentiate truth from fiction because they're not built to do so. And we end up with worse and worse answers over time to all these questions, and more misinformation is wildly percolated throughout our information systems. That is another potential large-scale problem, though. The more immediate potential problem is that AI overviews could cause the collapse of the revenue model that Google has been pitching forever and that has allowed the web to get to where it is today. And the consequent disappearance of all of those websites, all of those blogs and news entities and such, could become a reality. And that could very quickly disrupt all of the industries that rely, at least in part, on this search engine traffic in order to exist, while also causing all of these AI overviews to over time become less accurate and useful. Even more so than they sometimes are today, because the information that they present is scraped from these sites, taking all of that writing, all of that information, rewording it a bit, and then serving that information to users without compensating the folks who did the research and wrote those original words. What we seem to have then is a situation in which this new tool, which Google seems very keen to implement, could be primed to kill off a whole section of the internet, collapsing the careers of folks who work in that segment of the online world, and then over time that will degrade the quality of the thing that they are using to replace all of those separate websites, because Google's AI relies upon information that it scrapes, that it steals basically from those same sites. And if those people are no longer there to create the information that it needs to steal in order to function, that then leaves us with increasingly useless and even harmful summaries where we used to have search results that pointed us toward relatively valuable things. Those things located on other web pages, but accessed via Google. And this change would keep us on Google more of the time, limiting our click-throughs to other pages, which in the short term at least would seem to benefit Google at everyone else's expense, but which ultimately could be at their expense as well. Another way of looking at this, though, is that the search model has been bad for quite some time. All these entities optimizing their work for the search engine, covering everything they make in robot, prioritizing SEO, changing their writing, what they write about and how they publish, their business models in order to creep up a little higher in those search engine listings. And that, combined with the existing refocusing on major entities over smaller, at times better entities, has already depleted this space, the search engine world, to such a degree that losing it is arguably actually not such a big deal. It may actually make way for better options, better ways of organizing and exploring the web, Google becoming less of a player, ultimately at least, and our web habits rewiring to focus on some other type of search engine or some other organizational and navigational method altogether. This seeming managed decline of the web is not being celebrated by many people, because like many industry-wide upsets, it would lead to a lot of tumult, a lot of lost jobs, a lot of collapsed companies, and even if the outcome is eventually wonderful in some ways, replacing what exists now with something way, way better, there will almost certainly be a period, maybe years, maybe a decade, of significantly less good online experiences, leaving us with a more cluttered and less accurate and reliable version of what came before. A recent study showed that at the moment, about 52% of what ChatGPT tells its users is wrong. It's likely that these sorts of tools will remain very imperfect for a long while, though it's also possible that they will get better eventually, to the point that they're at least as accurate and perhaps even more so than today's linked search results. The wave of deals being made between AI companies and big news entities like The Times supports the assertion that these AI companies are at least trying to make that kind of future happen, though these deals, like a lot of the other things happening in this space right now, would also seem to favor those big monolithic brands like The Times at the expense of the rest of the news and other informational ecosystem. whatever happens, and one thing that has happened since I started working on this episode is that Google rolled back its AI overview feature in many search results, so they are maybe reworking it a bit to make sure it's more ready for prime time before deploying it broadly again. But whatever else happens, we are stepping toward a period of vast and multifaceted unknowns, and just as many creation-related industries are currently questioning the value of hiring another junior graphic designer or copywriter, opting instead to use cheaper AI tools to fill those gaps, for better or for worse, there is a good chance that a lot of web-related work in the coming years will be delegated to these sorts of tools, as common business models in this space evolve into new and unfamiliar permutations, and our collective perception of what the web even is maybe gives way to a new conception or several new conceptions of the same. The book I'd like to recommend today is called Pandora's Box: The Greed, Lust, and Lies That Broke Television by Peter Biskind. This book focuses primarily on the history, the genesis and evolution of HBO, but it uses HBO as a lens through which to view the emergence and evolution of the rest of the TV world. And that's TV through peak TV, but then also segueing into what we have today. The types of shows that we have on streaming services, the emergence of what's recently been called mid-TV, where there's a lot of good stuff but nothing outstanding, and how the people behind all of this thought about this evolution, justified it, argued for it, and in some cases kept aspects of it from happening entirely. Now, if any of that sounds interesting to you, pick up a copy of Pandora's Box by Peter Biskind. You can subscribe to receive email updates, find show notes and other such content, and support this show financially, receiving additional bonus episodes as a thank you at letsknowthings.com. Learn more about me and my work at Colin.io. Subscribe to my other news-focused podcast, One Sentence News, wherever you get your pods, or at onesentencenews.com. And say howdy on social media. I'm at Colin is my name on Instagram and Twitter, and Colin Wright on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Colin Wright, and I'll talk to you again next week.